potentially quote superpowers psychologically is that they're the only known. All right, we're live. Welcome everybody. Dr. Paul here again with the illustrious Jeremy Fox, and we have people joining. Uh, Jeremy and I had the idea that something useful yet different for you that you don't see all that often, since we're both pretty trained at various models of psychology. We wanted to talk about what are called ego defenses, and there's lots of applications of those to areas of life you care a lot about, and even some of the hot topics out there on the internet, like what is narcissism and how to spot it, and what is narcissistic abuse, or what are the effects of social media on our minds. How do you grow as a person and develop keener observation of human behavior in others and also in yourself to help yourself grow, work on your own mental health? And when we thought about what would be some of the most core teachable skills, principles that people could learn to work on all these areas and have them structured in a logical way where you could pick and choose tools to use, we thought of
Right.
ego defenses. And part of the reason we thought of them as potentially quote superpowers psychologically is that they're the only known measure to date of how to assess somebody's, today you would call it emotional intelligence, but back in my day you call it maturity or maturity of character. They're the only way to be able to measure this sort of thing. Now I'm trying to stay out of the sunlight so I don't produce my typical hot phone for some reason here. I'm going to kind of change angle. So what do you think of this, Jeremy? If we were to start with maybe uh, a quick little talk about what are the ego defenses and how are they stratified? There's four levels.
Yeah. So denial is a primitive defense. So it's early on in life that people develop this. It's really associated um, with narcissistic personality structure, and with very cognitive rigidity. So there's going to be, just outright denying things. So it's a refusal to acknowledge external reality. And as all defense mechanisms are designed to do, as they do, that it blunts out anxiety. So it deals with the anxiety from reality in some way. And denial simply says it doesn't exist, that what's happening isn't there. Um, it's pretty associated with addictions, grief, and trauma, and it can save your
Mm.
life if you're in the midst of a trauma and you have to just deny it. So it has a place like all defense mechanisms. Um, but as is the case with all defenses, some can be life saving, a lot can be socially destroying. So, like the four levels, psychotic, immature, neurotic, and mature. Okay. And I know George Valent talks about it. This is right there in the psychotic or least adaptive or primitive, whatever you want to call it. Different analysts call it different things. But I
Yeah.
mean, even in that term psychotic, you've got that disconnection from reality. So I'm excited for it. I think diving in with a popular thing that can happen now with people and really wreak havoc in relationships is a great way to arm our viewers with some relational wisdom.
Yeah. And to part of the idea of how could these be superpowers? Well, if you're using, you said psychotic level defenses. I've always liked the term primitive.
Good.
Or, yeah, primitive is a good word for the reason that psychotic makes you think, oh, well, that's a crazy person, rather than understand it's a level of maturity. So the most
Right.
primitive we could be would be in our development would be like being a baby, being an infant, where you poop and pee and you do it in public and it's in diapers and you want what you want and you want it now, and you get very hangry, and when you get hangry people better supply nutrients and so forth. um, I most often when patients have asked about these and how to use them, what are they, my common person way of describing all ego defenses, from primitive to immature all the way up to mature, is that they are simply universal social habits
Right.
that that help us, like you said, survive or navigate the world with lowering of our own anxiety and stress by way of using them automatically. One thing that's key about them is that they are automatic the more primitive they are, and
Yes.
they become more conscious and thoughtful and intentional the more mature we become. So there is a
Exactly.
gradation between unconscious and instinctual and conscious and purposeful. And when that comes up, of course, I always think of the master theoretical model, the triune brain model, because the reptilian brain is where I would place the instincts, the unconscious and automatic behaviors like these social habits that are primitive or immature level. Those are reptilian. Then we climb up through the mammalian brain where there's more emotionality. The emotions are pre-conscious or subconscious, almost on the surface conscious. And then we get up to the conscious mind, which in the triune brain model is the higher brain. And to
Yes.
use that, you have to be doing things purposefully, intentionally. You're striving to be a good and mature person, aka emotionally intelligent person. And those are going to be ego defenses that are talked a lot about in one of the newer models of psychology, positive psychology. It's kind of what
Yes.
it's all built on, which are all the noble, aspirational traits that people want to use to become a good person, a mature person, a successful person, like being witty, being generous, altruistic, being thoughtful, stoic, to suppress, which is to purposely table a stressful issue, even though you're
Right.
aware it's stressful. You're able to tolerate two competing ideas at the same time, DBT style. You have humility, you have gratitude, thankfulness. All of these virtues, they're really character virtues.
Right.
The mature ego defenses, they're numerous. They're probably far more numerous than the primitive and immature ones because there's so many synonyms for human virtues. And
Right.
guess what? Positive psychology and its mature ego defenses and virtues were known all the way back with who? Aristotle.
Sure.
Aristotle listed all of the traits of goodness in humans, and those are the mature ego defenses. So if you have superpowers, they're going to be mature ego defenses. And if you have weaknesses or you want to recognize weaknesses in others, you're going to look for primitive and immature ego defenses. So that's kind of my little spiel on this. We decided to begin with the granddaddy of all primitive instinctual social habits or ego defenses, which is denial. So you just described denial in a great way. I always think of all ego defenses as actually having personal boundary functions involved.
Yeah.
The most mature ego defenses, the virtues, all have rock solid boundaries, very respectful of others, respectful of the self. And what does a boundary do? Ultimately, it helps us recognize what do we control in life from what we do not control. So all the way back to the worst, most primitive ego defense, the most juvenile, primitive, psychotic, infantile ego defense, denial. What would that look like in terms of a personal boundary? I think of a circle. You're inside the circle and you are looking at the edge of your boundary. If
Right.
your boundary is mature and solid, you see the edge. And that means you understand and respect what you own, control, and are responsible for in your world. But what if you had a giant hole in your boundary, almost like a big picture window in a house, and the window's open, and you are you're so up close to the window, the hole is so big, you're looking out, and like a cat everything you see, you think you own because you don't see the limits of what you own and control. There's
Right.
no boundary there. It's a hole. So a hole in the boundary is a primitive, juvenile, infantile form of a boundary anatomy that we all are born with. We're very fragile, completely fragile psychically, and we
Right.
rely on a parenting figure, a mother and father, hopefully, to give us their boundary and store us inside their boundary until we can grow one. So what
Yeah.
happens if you look out a hole, just looking out a window in a house? All you see really feels like that's the reality that you own all you see. You own your backyard, you own your driveway, you own everything you see out the hole, the window in your boundary. And it is an unfortunate illusion because, in a way, it's not your fault unless somebody points out to you you're looking out a window. It's not your fault because it really feels real that you should, the operative word is should, control and own everything you see and be responsible for everything you see. So you're this
Right.
giant empathic caretaker of others, of everyone you know, and it exhausts you and they get frustrated with you for over sharing, over helping. So what do you think of that as like a boundary model of what is denial? Looking at a hole in your boundary and thinking you're entitled to everything you can see.
Yeah, I like
You,
that. I mean, I think that's a really great metaphor. I'm thinking of others like if you are in denial about your responsibility and, maybe a trauma caused this kind of runway of feeling powerless, like people's circle could be very small and they can think, or if they were raised in a very disempowered way, like, oh, that's not something I can control when it's a decision in their life. Like, what they want to do with life, or the circle can be really wide and it can encompass so much and they can think everything is inside it. Like, oh, well, I should be able to control what my partner does every minute of the day. That's totally within my rights. And so that's too big, way too big. And I think with social media, you get a false sense of um self-empowerment and agency with interacting with strangers and celebrities, and the idea that no one's really entitled to privacy. And so, well, it's true you can snoop way more than you used to be able to, and you can stalk people's profiles, but how adaptive is it? How much of a pattern does that set that then changes your character or virtue to then have a far wider scope of what you feel you should be able to control and dictate and even discuss and give your 2 cents on.
well, it- I want to get back to you mentioned the author Nancy.
Nancy McWilliams, psychoanalyst. Yes, I did.
Yeah. Well, one of the quick ways people like quick tips and tricks and hacks and so forth. So so my hack for how would you recognize someone who is walking around being in denial? It is the master ego defense, primitive ego defense that explains why people feel they can be entitled because they
Yes.
don't see the limits of what they own. So they walk in like a bull in a bull in a china shop,
Yeah.
and they overstep their boundaries. They overstep your boundaries. They tell you how to be, who to be, what's wrong with you, how you make them mad and angry, which is not possible. They're just angry. It explains
Right.
why they just overstep everyone else's boundaries. It's because they can't see the boundaries. It's a
Sure.
giant window. So the key word, the hack, is the word should. What is the when someone says should a lot, like you really should change your hairstyle, you really shouldn't wear clothes like that, you really should do what I want you to do when I want you to do it. When people say should, that automatically tells you they wish to have control over something they clearly don't,
Right.
right? That's your key. Any word like the word should is a tip off. including when you use it, even in your own head, when you think, "Oh, I shouldn't be so stupid. I shouldn't I shouldn't have done that. Um, I should be more this. I should be more that." It's a clue that you're wishing to control something you don't. Maybe you want to work on it in the real world rather than just in your imagination, that you could just magically um, become something different or have a skill you don't yet have. It's a tip off to what Buddhists call suffering. Suffering means, in Buddhism, to my understanding, trying to control the uncontrollable and burning energy on it, wasting
Right.
energy or time on the uncontrollable is
Yes.
suffering. So
Right.
when you use the word should, you're suffering, or someone else is suffering.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting because pain in that line of thought is just a part of life. But when it comes to suffering, suffering's optional. It involves our response to it. It's like anger being drinking poison and hoping someone else suffers the effects of it is a I think a Buddhist. I'm paraphrasing a Buddhist phrase.
Oh
So
yeah.
denial, if the way people think is, I can't acknowledge this absence, it's crippling, or I can't acknowledge this terrible grief or trauma, so I have to blunt it out. Like, often their narratives are so black and white about, oh, I have to have this figured out right now. Oh, la la la, I'm not listening. That I think this dovetails right into the idea of radical acceptance that we talked about how to go underneath the denial and avoid that rapid push off that
Good point.
denial
Good
results in.
point.
Thank you.
If these so dovetailing on that, if the primitive and immature ego defenses, if part of their nature is they make us socially unacceptable, awkward, ineffective, because it's like using childhood's social habits in the adult world. So of course they're not going to work well anymore, even if they
Right.
helped us survive for a time, some terrible events or what have you. We need an antidote for them. So if I think of them as immature behavior or emotionally unintelligent behavior, to use the euphemism, what would be the antidote for immaturity? It would probably be maturity, mature mentorship, let's say. A mature adult who guides us in learning new behavior and growing out of those old unconscious habits, which is a hard thing to do if something's unconscious. So, what would be the mature person antidote for being in denial and just being wishfully thinking, if only I had won the lotto, or if only I had, control over all these people and things I don't control? It would be acceptance. And I like
Yes.
the term radical acceptance because it's saying we're going to rip you out of your dream world and into the reality of what you actually need to do to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Yes. One quick note on that. You've made me think a lot of EMDR work, and to not give a whole masterclass on that, but the desensitization therapy that involves the distraction of eye movement or hand tapping or buzzers or whatever. Often people will come in with traumatic experiences and they'll be in denial and believe in that kind of childlike logic. Well, I should have been able to stand up to that person. And it'll be like,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
a 7-year old or someone who can't possibly fight an adult. And so moving through and desensitizing the pain and that horrible realization that you were a kid and couldn't do anything is really the therapeutic work. And the lesson there is, well, I'm an adult now. I can move about how I want. It's kind of like aging up the capacity for mentalization, right? Good trauma work and good radical acceptance therapy. And it's certainly not radical approval that it happened, but it's taking that starting point of
Mm.
reality of it wasn't your fault. You were a kid, and removing the denial and magical thinking part with a caring therapist there to handle that grief response and that pain that comes from the broken denial.
I think you made me think of various terms like Stockholm syndrome, all the at the time adaptive, but then later in life maladaptive ways of surviving a trauma by living in an imaginary world that you somehow could have prevented the trauma if you were a 7-year-old boy,
Right.
or or you align with the bank robber, like the Stockholm syndrome, to feel less powerless and utterly helpless, you use denial to say, no, 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 if only I had smiled more, the person wouldn't have hurt me. Or, oh, no, 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 only if I had not walked left instead of right down that street, then I wouldn't have gotten attacked. That's denial, right? Well, I
Yeah.
like thinking of trauma sometimes in boundary terms. If you could imagine a somewhat mature person with a solid, solid boundary, a sphere around them, and then an assailant comes along and attacks them, produces trauma, psychological trauma. I
Yes.
envision that as someone busting a bunch of holes in your boundary.
Oh, it
So
absolutely is.
so now you have these boundary holes caused by the trauma. And so
Yes.
you regress. You go from more mature to more interior and fearful. And part of why you're fearful is now you have all these open windows and doors in your psyche through the damage. And now you start using more primitive ego defenses simply because of the anatomy of those holes being there. Your mind
Right.
plays tricks on you. You imagine that
Yeah.
there are monsters right outside the boundary.
Yeah.
Um,
Regression for sure.
so radical acceptance then, and synonyms like it, such as tolerance, temperance, patience,
Yeah.
um, acceptance. These are all similar and synonymous with each other. Any of those that you meditate on, cultivate on, and importantly, you have to consciously, intentionally, purposely employ them. You have to almost write them down and remember, no, no, these are what I need to use. And let me say this too. If if we as children used primitive ego defenses and they worked well as children, they got the support of adults to
Right.
come and do things for us, to feed us, the magical thinking of if I cry, all of a sudden food appears.
Yeah.
Wow, that's magic. I am magical. I am omnipotent and all powerful if I can magically make food appear by crying. Well, it's real tempting to stick with that because it's so fantastically powerful. And I mean fantastically, imagination. It,
Right.
but the seduction of holding on to that power would supersede for a lot of us the knowledge we must grow up and live in the real world and set real goals and get real tools and skills to achieve those real goals. It'd be tempting to just stay forever in our parents' basement playing video games and never go out into the world and grow. So I would want to add to all of this um, that to cultivate the superpowers of mature ego defenses, human virtues, character virtues, I want to promise that if you will only do the work to practice at them and use them, you will be way happier in a more stable way and way more successful. And there is philosopher evidence for that. It's the old quote by Freud, who was quoting ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who said, character is destiny. And what does that mean? It means if you grow up, you start to get control over your actual destiny as a person. You want your life to have a happy ending, not a tragic one. And you can control that destiny ever more so by cultivating mature ego defenses and human virtues.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And I think people view it the other way around that if they get what they're entitled, I mean, not everyone clearly, but if there's more primitive organization, it's going to be of the personality, it's going to be more, well, I need this thing or I'm entitled to this, and then I'll start giving to others. And it often works the other way, where when you cultivate the good character, you get more of what you're looking for, to be blunt about it.
Absolutely. So then, if as we go through this series with you, we're going to do a primitive or immature ego defense and describe what it is, how you see it in your life and in others, and then we're going to describe the superpower uh, cure antidote in the form of mature ego defenses that counter that immature one.
Excited for it. It's going to be a
All
great
right.
dichotomy, the good and the bad, right?
Wonderful. I love it.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for getting
Thank
together
you.
yet again. We'll do it again soon with another ego defense.
We will. Be a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks. Bye bye now.